Welcome. Today we're talking about this book, which is The Sciences of the Artificial by Herbert A. Simon. Simon was an academic who passed away in 2001, who spanned a lot of different disciplines. He was an economist, a psychologist, AI pioneer, complex systems theorist, and a person who theorized a lot about decision-making and if there's a science of design. In the tagline, the poster for the video, I named it the 1978 Nobel Prize winner because Simon did win a Nobel Prize for economics. He also won the Turing Prize, which is somewhat like a Nobel Prize for computer science. And the book that we're talking about today, Sciences of the Artificial, is all around the science of design and AI, artificial intelligence. I put the science in sort of quotation marks because this book, really, which first was released in 1969, is an important foundation stone in sort of the idea that there even is a science of design. And the key idea that the book talks about is all around the contrast between natural sciences, which we think of so Isaac Newton founding in Cambridge in England, versus this sort of new science that Simon is talking about, being around the science of creating things, the science of artificial things. So we're going to go through the key ideas in the book, and it is incredibly important. I think it's been referenced like 36,000 times on Google Scholar. It crosses so many different disciplines that it's very, very important. I've got getting on for 10-12 pages of notes here. If you want these notes, there's a link in the description below that you can get them on, and they should be useful, and you can go through them at your leisure and print them out. Okay, so Simon was an academic at Carnegie Mellon University in the US, passed away in 2001, was born in 1916. So he really saw a huge span of information technology and changes in science over, including World War II. So what is the central, this part one of this video, what is the central idea or argument of this book, and why does it matter? So the key idea is essentially replacing what we normally talk of as natural science, which if you go to Cambridge University, you can study natural sciences, which then branches off into physics, into chemistry, into biology. But Simon has replaced natural with artificial there. You can see it right there on the front cover. This is the 1996 edition, which has expanded upon the original ideas of the 1969 edition. 1969 was somewhat a long time ago. Man landed on the moon in that year. But the foundational idea remains the same. So think of that term, natural sciences, but replace natural with artificial. And what does Simon mean by artificial? Essentially, these are things that have been created by man to achieve goals for purposes. And you likely can think of many different things around you in the world that fit within that classification of artificial. Simon doesn't think it's necessary to dwell too much on areas that fit within the grey area, and it's better just to say, is this a natural system or a artificial one? And so if there are artificial things that fit within that category, so things created by man for a purpose, you literally probably everything around you, if you're sat at home, unless you're actually in a forest, it's likely virtually everything around you is artificial. Okay, so there's this key idea that there are things that are artificial and they contrast with things that are natural. Then by extension, if we say, well, if there's a science of artificial that's different from a natural science, then we're essentially into the world of design as a science. So design is bringing into being artificial objects, which unto themselves are those created by man for particular purposes. And if we think of this idea that as design as a science, very quickly it becomes incredibly important for our essentially civilization. This is what distinguishes humans from other animals. Then another key idea is this idea of complexity, which is added to in the 1996 edition, this version in my hand. A whole new chapter is added for complexity, sort of recognizing this as a change that has occurred since 1969 when the book was first published. So why does it matter? Why has this book been so important? One, it's just putting a stake in the ground that there even is a science of the artificial, and that it is different from natural sciences. Additionally, if we are to create artificial intelligences, or we are to explore the human mind and human intelligence, it necessitates a study of the artificial, in that creating an artificial intelligence is creating an artificial thing, which requires evidently a lot of study. But if it's to mimic that of human cognition, then we, in addition, need to study that. So it becomes this interlocking, overlapping nexus of incredibly important topics. And in my own mind, this isn't from Simon's writing. This is just sort of me thinking about it. I sort of view it as a 2x2 matrix. So if you imagine you've got two columns, one being natural and one being artificial, and then two rows, one being science and one being intelligence. Within that grid, you would have natural science, which we understand from the times of Isaac Newton as essentially observing the natural world, and then through all that observation, explaining it. So we can observe that if we drop an object from a building, Isaac Newton was then able to, from those observations, come up with explanations, being essentially the laws of gravity, and ways to make predictions about that, essentially Newton's laws, F equals ma, these types of things. So that's the first quadrant, so that natural science. Then artificial science, or the sciences of the artificial, it's sort of phrased correctly as per the title. So this is studying of those of the human made world. And then on the bottom row, so those are the intelligence, we have natural intelligence. So this is understanding sort of human cognition. Important, as Simon was a psychologist among his many fields of expertise. And then artificial intelligence, which, remember, this book was written in 1969. I'm talking now right at the tail end of 2024. Artificial intelligence has become a very hot topic, but it's been under investigation for a huge amount of time. And the Turing test, Turing was very famous for his contributions in World War II. In the 1940s. So artificial intelligence is no way a very new thing of the last couple of years. It is an important one that has remained in understanding. So for myself, where I find Simon's work to be very important is in essentially declaring that there is a science of design, there is a sciences of the artificial that's distinct from natural sciences, and therefore and it should be studied, and is of incredible importance for the world. Okay, so part 2 of this video, how is the book organized and how should you read it? So there are 8 separate chapters. You could read it cover to cover. That's what I did. I like it. I've read it several times. If though you have limited time, or you want to sort of dip your toes into it and navigate around it, I'll sort of give you a bit of an overview. So everyone should read the chapter 1, which is understanding the natural and artificial worlds. That really gives you the basis of where Simon's coming from, and is essentially the title of the book. Then, if you're more on design complexity systems, which much of the audience of these videos tends to be, I would head to chapter 5, 6, 7, and 8. So that's chapter 5, the science of design, chapter 6, social planning, chapter 7, alternative views on complexity, and then chapter 8, the architectural complexity. But if you're really pushed for time, just go for chapter 5, which is the science of design. Then if you're more of an economics person, you should read chapter 2, which is economic rationality. And if you're more cognition, psychology, sociology, then likely chapter 3, the psychology of thinking, and chapter 4, remembering and learning. And just the fact that I'm able to divide potential audiences into those free camps beyond sort of a more casual person who's only interested in the top level view, economics, cognition, psychology, how people think, and then the third being design complexity systems. It sort of just shows how this work really does intersect between so many different fields, which one would expect. I'll just flash onto the screen the matrix I drew when I was explaining previously around thinking about a 2x2, natural, artificial, and then science and intelligence, and then in the center of the matrix, the combinations of those. So you can get that matrix from the link below when you get the PDF of the notes. So you should do that. Right. So yeah, I think pick those chapters based on your interest and go away. But we'll go through each of the sections now. So part 3 of this video. How has the sciences of the artificial evolved since publication in 1969, and how has it remained relevant today? So as I mentioned, published in 1969. So that's man on the moon year. That's before Microsoft, before Apple. They don't come till 1975. Back then, the book was only about 100 pages long. It's since grown to about 200 pages long. It's still pretty thin, which to me shows how it is addressing sort of the key overviews for an entire field, or it's kind of beyond a field. Is in as much as natural sciences is a very wide area of study and how we understand the universe, and the sciences of the artificial to some extent could be maybe even bigger, because it involves, rather than studying what exists and making that predictable, it involves creation, and there's essentially an infinite amount of different things that could be created, whereas studying what exists is to some extent bounded by what the contents of the universe is, as opposed to generating multiple future scenarios and options, which is without limit. Okay, so the key things that sort of change as you move from the first edition 69, second edition 81, and then the third edition 1996 is refinements around the evolution of AI, artificial intelligence, and also complexity and economics. So you should certainly jump straight to the third edition. Only look at first and second edition for if you would like a historic perspective in how things change. But it's definitely a very important framework for understanding how to design complex systems and what is the deep underlying processes that are being performed, whether they're being performed by humans or by artificial intelligence. And the key subjects which remains important today would be around complexity science, artificial intelligence, human-computer interaction, design thinking, design science, anything that involves decision-making. Right, part 4 of this video, artificial versus natural. As I mentioned before, this is the really key idea that you have to grasp to make sense of the entire book. So artificial being anything synthesized by humans to achieve specific goals. And that could be something that's created intentionally or unintentionally. You can have a think about there what would be an unintentionally created thing by humans to achieve goals, but certainly you can think of plenty of intentionally created ones. This jacket I'm wearing, it was created intentionally to achieve the goal of keeping me warm, or to carry my phone that's in my pocket, that kind of thing. And so an artificial system is distinguished from a natural system in that a natural system doesn't have this human created to achieve specific goals. It's taken to just exist, and we can study it. Another key aspect of an artificial, a thing that is artificial, is around this idea of imperatives and descriptives. So imperatives are the oughts that this artificial system, or this artificial thing, this artifact must do, whereas with natural systems we tend to be in the descriptives world. It is a thing rather than it ought to do. A river ought not do anything. It just is. It flows from the mountain to the coast. It doesn't. There's no. It ought to go past my house so I can go fishing. Like it doesn't. It just is. Whereas if you were to build a dam or reroute the river, then human goal making is there, and maybe you would reroute it so you can go fishing at your convenience near your home if that was your goal. And then a key word that is used throughout the book, which we don't use so much so commonly, would be artifice, which refers to human-made objects and systems, and that contrasts with naturally occurring phenomena. So we'll hear this word artifice quite a bit, especially in the chapter titles. Okay, so part 5 of this video will describe chapter 1, understanding the natural and artificial worlds. So this would be the key chapter to read. If you don't read any of the other chapters, read this chapter. So here we define the artificial, which you should now have in your mind, being that of something created by humans for a particular purpose. We distinguish between these, and some examples are provided that help guide the reader. So clocks are used at the beginning of the book, and how they're used as an example of purpose. So we can think of a clock as providing the purpose of timekeeping. It's generally used, but then they can have off of that other purposes. So ship clocks was a very important field of endeavor to improve, such that they could be used for navigation. And we know even today, the GPS system relies on atomic clocks in orbit, and the difference, GPS isn't mentioned in this book, but they are used to the difference in the time it takes for that signal to meet the receiver, the thing on the ground that needs to know its position, your car, your mobile phone, aircraft. They use that difference in the time delay from those atomic clocks that are all synchronized up in orbit. So anyway, clocks are used as an example of purpose, but they're also used as an example of how they have adaptations for their environment. So a sundial, a very rudimentary type of clock, relies on access to sunshine, and if you were to use it in the North Pole in the winter time, the sun isn't out very much, so it might not be so good. Whereas if you're using it in the desert of Las Vegas, which has very good sunshine cover, then it's much more effective. Okay, and then there's also an example of ants, so in illustrating sort of behaviors of at a high level can be somewhat simple, i.e. sort of moving of food from the colony, or from the outside to the colony, but at the individual level, very, very complex. Like an individual ant itself has a huge amount of complexity associated with it. You think of all the, it has eyes, it has a digestive system, all that sort of thing. So yeah, chapter 1, we sort of covered a fair amount in the introduction to this video, just because it's so important to really understand that distinction in artificial versus natural. So then part 6 of this video, so chapter 2, economic rationality, adaptive artifice. So economic rationality is really where Herbert Simon received his Nobel Prize. He received the Nobel Prize for economics, and his work focused on the idea that previously much of economics held an assumption that every economic agent, every human, every company had perfect rationality and would act to maximize its profit, and would not deviate from what was rational. And what Herbert's research expanded was to show how humans don't operate under perfect rationality, but what he referred to as bounded rationality, in that humans don't have access to all the information, nor could they process all the information, and therefore their rationality is bounded by the amount of information they have, and their own sort of cognitive abilities to process it. And so instead of sort of optimizing for this perfect rationality, they go for good enough due to this limited information and computational power. So he shows in this chapter 2 how sort of business decisions, real-world business decisions and market dynamics are bounded like this, and that we shouldn't be assuming that they've gone for all this perfect optimized solutions. And so yeah, I mean that was novel. It hadn't been articulated like that before. So then in part 7 of this video, chapter 3 of the book, the psychology of thinking, embedding artifice in nature. So this is where we step away from economics and move towards cognition and psychology. And Herbert Simon describes how human thinking is essentially simple, and it's simple sort of in the inner environment within the individual person, but for the interactions with the environment, they become complex. So complexity is driven through environmental interaction, not within the individual. And he provides some examples essentially around how problems can be easy or difficult for humans, and easy and difficult for logic and what we would call today artificial intelligence. So he provides, there are some diagrams in here. There aren't that many diagrams in the book, but within the psychology of thinking there are a few. So they show sort of chess as an example. I mean, that's just a picture of a chessboard. If you can't watch the video, you're just listening, you're not missing much here. And also sort of these search trees, which are easy for algorithms to solve, but are challenging for humans. Okay. So on to part 8 of this video, chapter 4. So remembering and learning, memory as an environment of thought. So here is where Herbert Simon talks about what he refers to as a storehouse, long-term memory storehouse, and how that can influence decision-making. Clearly it is important, and humans have limitations to the amount of memory they can have. But it really is, in his view, how the human, when handling complex tasks, complex decision-making tasks, interacts through its environment is with this memory, and that could then be memory like within a computer or sort of human memory. And so he gives an example of Taxi in Pittsburgh. He's a Carnegie Mellon faculty, famously in Pittsburgh, and illustrates how that driver's long-term memory of the map of the city, of what might be the best road to go on based on the time of day, based on the weather conditions, things like that, are incredibly important for real-world tasks. So if let's say you can drive a car and we put you in a taxi in Pittsburgh, you've never been there before. In the modern age, we have satellite navigations and things, but if we remove all that and a passenger gets in and said, take me from here to the airport, if you've never been to, or a more a destination that's more obscure, it says, take me to the cinema near the docks. I'm sorry, Pittsburgh is in a dock city, but it did take me to the cinema or something. You don't have the memory, and so you're going to need to open up a map or use a modern tool like satellite navigation or something, which provides memory, which provides information about the environment, such that you can then make decisions as to, okay, turn left here, things like that, and take the passenger to the destination. He also gives an example of chess and sort of demonstrates how intuition can be explained as acts of recognition based on extensive experience. So if we know that you get better at chess through practice, and I'm not a big chess player, but I understand you can essentially memorize a lot of moves, which then when you see that your opponent has made certain other moves, it becomes appropriate for you to counter with your moves. And then there's another example around a checkerboard. Okay, so now on to part 9 of this video, chapter 5, the science of design, creating the artificial. So this is probably the second most important chapter, especially for those who are interested in design and developing systems, things of that nature. So the science of design. Design is the central activity to many professions, not just engineering, because it essentially involves understanding a problem space, producing some feasible solutions, selecting among them. So he frames design as problem solving, and there's a logic to it, and the key topics that he views should be incorporated into any curriculum of engineering, but essentially curriculum of problem solving would be essentially the evaluation of designs, so that you can evaluate which would be better or worse courses of action. And then so off of that, you've got a theory of evaluation, be that utility theory, statistical decision making, computational methods, so algorithms. We might, this is run a bit up previous time, but linear programming comes up, control theory, dynamic programming, but algorithms in general for solving computational problems, so you can evaluate the formal logic of design, search for alternatives, theory and structure of design organizations, and then representation of design problems. So Herbert Simon here is really clarifying what are the fundamental aspects of design, such that you can then create a design process, and ultimately could involve artificial intelligence to aid at that. Okay, part 10 of this video, chapter 6 of the book, social planning and designing the evolving artifact. So again, we then come back to this topic of bounded rationality as it applies to social design, and this can be a bit subtle and hard to explain, but there's a nice example. So if you remember the Marshall Plan, which was the after World War II, the US government essentially wanting to spend a phenomenal amount of money in Europe to rebuild and to prevent the Soviet Union and communists rising up and things, and at least make Western Europe a prosperous place. There was a key question as to how to organize what became the Economic Cooperation Administration, which implemented the Marshall Plan. And 6 different conceptions were created for the agency, which were all essentially based on, or that those differences arise due to different conceptions of the question that the ECA had to implement. So I think that what he's pushing at here is to recognize that when moving into social planning, essentially design of organizations that would then implement plans that would operate over multiple citizens, to think of them as design problems, and in that identification of what problem that organization would even solve will influence, or ought to influence and will influence, the design of that overall organization. And got to remember, this was written in 69, so some of these ideas, which today might sound a bit like somewhat, not necessarily obvious, but more commonly discussed, were very, very new at the time. Okay, so part 11, this video, chapter 7, alternative views of complexity. So this is a chapter that was introduced for the 1996 edition, which sort of recognizes clearly that complexity is becoming a more important topic. So this is the time as internet and World Wide Web were sort of becoming apparent, things like that. So he first of all recognizes different perspectives on complexity. This is something I've been involved with quite a bit with my contributions to the INCO's, a future systems engineering, where we do work on complexity. Complexity is a very contested topic without clear consensus as to its definitions. And Herbert A, back in 1996, reiterates this, and that it can be approached in different ways. So he talks about holism versus reductionism. Cybernetics, that's around feedback loops, chaos theory, genetic algorithms, hierarchical systems. And hierarchical systems he recognizes being a common pattern in complex systems as a way of managing the complexity and dynamics. So I think this is definitely a great chapter for someone who would like to sort of understand the diversity of these of complexity, but there are some more modern books. Don't think I have anything around me, but Melanie Mitchell has a good book sort of describing this large amount of diversity in conceptions of complexity, and perhaps we could do that book in a couple of months' time or something. Let me know if you're interested in that. Okay, so part 12 of the video, chapter 8, the architecture of complexity, hierarchical systems. So here we talk about decomposability, and can things be decomposed, and essentially further topics on complexity. But there's a nice example here where he talks about evolution of complex systems and why decomposability and hierarchy are functionally important for the successful development of a complex system. So he talks about this watchmaker's parallel. So you imagine 2 different gentlemen who make watches. One of those, they both make very high quality watches and both have a lot of customers. One of them, though, when he makes the watch using a method whereby if he's ever interrupted, so his phone rings and he picks up the phone, that watch disassembles and is reverted back to its original state. Somehow it's all sprung together, and if he lets go, it all springs apart. He's back to normal. Clearly, if you were making a watch like that, it would be much slower because you would be interrupted, or you'd have to hire a secretary or some sort of a person who became a gatekeeper that prevented you being interrupted as you make this watch. Versus another watchmaker, your competitor, who has modularized certain parts of the process. Thus, if he's interrupted, he can at least revert back to those individual modules that have been made to a point, which unto themselves remain self-contained and then can be reassembled. So he talks about this as an example, a parable of why decomposability is very important for the evolution of systems, and likely the evolution of systems is incredibly important, and thus something likely to be strived for when you yourself are creating something artificial. Other examples, biological systems, divided into different sort of hierarchies. So we have the digestive system as separate system from the blood circulating system, but they clearly interface with each other. And that there's a whole range of different examples. So governments are divided up into these hierarchies. Okay, so that's been a bit of a quick tour around the book. I think I would reiterate this idea that Herbert Simon proposes, that there's a sciences of the artificial that is different than the natural sciences. Artificial means things created by humans for purposes, and if you have that in your mind, you can then start to think how important those artificial things are for civilization to continue. And then if you're working in the creation of artificial things, how are you engaged with the sciences of the artificial versus natural sciences? Like most engineers, Newton's laws, Maxwell equations, these are all natural science ways of describing how the universe operates. But have you studied how artificial things come to being, and where are the equivalent laws? That's something I study, and if you're interested, you should look at our work on complexity, which aims to at least progress that. Great. So really do hope that you pick up a copy of the book, but also pick up a copy of my notes. You can get them in the link below. They'll come in a PDF. If you've got any questions of things, you can leave a comment below, or you can message me. There's many different ways below to do that. There's also links there as well. There's also a link to the page where there's several other books spanning a range of different disciplines, mainly systems type stuff, but I try to keep it broad. We don't just stay focused on model-based systems engineering, something like that. We go wide because it's super important to really understand the full remit. So thanks for listening, and look forward to seeing you soon.